resistance training is, they can take away everything in terms of like your comfort, your warmth, your food, et cetera, make you disoriented, but they can't take away your will to resist, right? And they can't take away your mind, right? That's the thing that you can always control in terms of resistance. And so I emphasized that to her what they taught us over and over, which is never forget who the enemy is.
Hi, this is Michael Waits, and welcome back to the Asia Tech Podcast. We are joined today by Gene Yu, a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, a former Green Beret, and the founder and CEO of BlackPanda. I feel like I'm not worthy to be on this call at all. Gene, how are you?
Good to see you again, Michael. You see, that makes me embarrassed.
Yeah. It's just really impressive stuff. Really impressive stuff. So thank you so much for coming back to the network. I want to get a kind of a quick update on BlackPanda, just its status. We haven't recorded, I think, in a couple of years. So I just want to do that. And then I want to get to the backstory, which we'll talk about in a sec.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for that. Since we've last spoken, BlackPanda is now distributed in every major country here in Asia except Korea. That's just where we don't have a big distributor partnership quite yet, but we're distributed regionally by Exclusive Networks, which is one of the larger cybersecurity distributors in the world. Additionally, we have partnerships in Japan with SoftBank CNS, which is the largest IT distributor up there. And we've signed strategic partnerships with Singtel here in Singapore, as well as MacroView HGC, which is the second largest telco in Hong Kong. So all things considered, I think we're moving pretty fast. We continue to be a specialized cybersecurity emergency response company, but we figured out a way to productize a service by wrapping it in an insurance-like product as well as a SaaS platform. So I like to call it that we productized it in an insurtech manner and come up with something that offers this relatively expensive cybersecurity service at anywhere from 10 to 20 times less the traditional price. And that's what's getting quite a bit of scale for us. We've been growing 26.2% month on month the last 9 months out of the market.
Wow. Does that surprise you, like how fast it's growing these days?
Yeah, absolutely. Now, just a caveat, especially for the audience as well, I expect that number to level off because it's right off the blocks, but it's still a nice number to throw around and say on your podcast, right? So
yeah, it surely is. It's funny though, when you start your own company, right? You have all these grand visions of like how big it's going to be and how fast it's going to grow and stuff like that. And at the beginning, at least for me, it's just a slog, right? Yeah. It's just a slog and it never moves as fast as you want it to. And look, I famously said that everyone's an overnight success 10 years later, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's an added aspect to cybersecurity I think is worth mentioning, right? Is that because cybersecurity by nature is so sensitive, and there's this thing called zero trust philosophy, the idea of coming around with a new product that the market hasn't seen before, and not just putting a marketing spin on. I mean, we really are something original in the market globally, right? That hasn't been seen before. And just by nature of that, it's going to take some time, for the market to trust it, for the brand awareness to sink in, to really wrap their head around it. So there's an aspect of that, I believe, as well. And BlackPanda, we've been in the cyberspace now for 5 years, and I think that we've done most would say if they've heard of us would point and say, wow, this company came out of nowhere and established a really niche brand around emergency response and cyber very quickly in Asia. And we've leveraged that brand strength now, the back of that, to launch something completely new that is getting some initial traction because of the credibility that BlackPanda had as a just traditional emergency response company.
Good stuff. Do you think the fact that you were Green Beret and that you did graduate from West Point also gives you some extra credibility?
Yeah, I think so. I was just reading the other day too that a huge factor for cybersecurity startups, again with the zero trust philosophy and all the concerns, the backgrounds of the founders and the investors matter a lot, right? And so I think that our story at BlackPanda with all the American Special Forces guys as founders, there's an interesting niche, to our brand and also just our identity as crisis responders, right? I mean, we have lived and breathed this our whole careers. We love it, right? From a certain perspective, we don't obviously love it that our victims are in pain and all this sort of stuff, but just from the aspect of, a sense of utility of helping the world and doing something of value in your own unique capability, right? Your own unique skills, knowledge, and abilities, right?
Yeah.
I can go out to on the street and hand out water bottles, in charitable events, but so can everybody else, right? And so
Right.
there's
Right.
an aspect like what can I do that other people may not commonly be able to do, and that's where we've kind of landed with our careers. So yes, to answer your question in short, I think so. Yes.
So I want to say one thing publicly that I said to you privately, and that is the first time we recorded, which I do think was like 2 years ago, you planted this thing in my brain about like fighting a war on a different surface.
Mm,
And I just can't get it out of my head. And I told you I use it all the time and I always attribute it to you because it's such a useful way to think about not just the cybersecurity, not just war itself, but just getting things done,
mm.
right? Because you see something work, some methodology work in one place, a thought process that works. And if you can transfer it to another surface, well, now you can actually have real impact. And you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel per se, but as long as the process is working or the thought process is working, moving it to that other surface should be easier, not easy. And I cannot stop thinking about it. And I just want to thank you for kind of planting that seed in my brain.
No, thanks for bringing that up, Michael. It's a good tie back to your previous question about being a West Point grad, computer science, and then also being a Green Beret and being a combat veteran, all that stuff. I kind of tongue in cheek refer to myself sometimes in cybersecurity as a macro cybersecurity guy rather than micro in terms of the technical details because
Right.
it's one way for me to just kind of talk about how I'm not very deep on the cyber technical side. But because of that angle and coming in from the outside, I viewed things on a very macro level of trying to solve a security problem that existed in cybersecurity rather than something very technical. And in
Yeah.
addition is that I didn't come into this, and Black Panda didn't start as a venture-backed company, right? We started out just as a small business of guys trying to figure out a problem in security, which is that we wanted to provide crisis response for a mass market. We thought that was an interesting space with our skill set. And over time, we discovered it was a much bigger problem in the digital space and crossed over from the physical to digital, which we can get into in a bit. But I wanted to share from the high level that that because of my background in both computer science and the physical security side, I never came into this trying to solve an investor problem, a
Right.
capital markets problem. You know what I mean? And a lot
Yep.
of cybersecurity startups are like that. They all want to be B2B SaaS, enterprise, et cetera, because they're trying to solve a valuation problem. I
Right.
came into this trying to solve a security problem, right? Which is fundamentally why is it that when somebody attempts to physically harm you, you can call 999 here in Singapore, 911 in the States, and somebody will pick up and help you, right? It's like
Right.
social contract. It's the most fundamental level of security everybody enjoys, even whether you own a company, whether you own a house, or you're homeless, you can call and somebody will come help you. But in the digital space, when somebody digitally attempts to harm you, there's nobody for you to call. And that's fundamentally the problem that we decided to set out to solve because it's a huge problem, right? And
Yeah.
not easy to solve as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think about this all the time, right? Because I run a uniquely digital business and I just think if something does go wrong,
Hmm.
right? If you didn't exist, who would I call?
Right.
There's nobody to call.
Right, right. Or even the fact is that right now, if you called us, we got to charge you by an hourly rate if
Right.
we're available, right?
Right.
So imagine if that existed. If a fire broke out, that you have to get on a Google and canvas for private fire brigades
Right.
for you to contract and then negotiate with them for an hourly rate while this fire is ongoing in your house, right? It doesn't make any sense at all, right?
No.
And maybe you can't even afford it because maybe you're a smaller company, smaller individuals, whatever, right? And so it comes back around to what we were just touching upon about looking at the physical safety and security world and understanding that 5, 10,000 years of human civilization were not filled with people that weren't smart enough to figure this out to the best of our abilities, at least in its form today,
Right.
which we all enjoy physical emergency response, whether it be police, fire, or medical, via paying tax. A little bit of tax that we all pay goes in the government's budget to pay for the unfortunate few. And the private sector version of that is insurance, right? Everybody pays a little bit of premium that goes in the insurance company, like us, Lloyd's of London Cyber Insurance Company, and pays for the unfortunate few that something occurs. And so that's essentially what we've done and productized in an insurance-like product with our cyber emergency response service in order to distribute to the masses so that it can be as inexpensive in the market right now. Our MSRP is $2,500 US for our smallest product for this, right?
Right.
Any company that has any type of business can afford that and now doesn't have to pay a variable spike of costs that could be ranging in the 25 to 50,000 US dollars on average with us, which is a major event out of budget, and just have this covered throughout the year. Right.
Exactly. Okay. I want to talk now about, because there is a kind of a unique management team at Black Panda.
Mm,
And I also like the way you say that you didn't found this business because you were trying to solve a valuation problem,
right.
right?
Right.
And I love that too. In other words, you didn't say like, here's a market gap that I want to fill because if I fill it, I can become a billionaire, right? That wasn't the idea
Right.
at all, actually. It was just a bunch of guys going, someone's got to fix this problem, right? No, but it's true though, and I actually like these kinds of businesses because I find that those businesses get started for a fundamental reason to solve a fundamental problem are always going to live longer than a business that just gets started like WeWork,
Mm,
so you can get funded,
right.
right?
Facing a venture
Anyway,
capital problem.
yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
Exactly. Mm,
let's talk as well though about why it was founded in the first place.
right.
You want
Right.
to tell me that story?
Yeah, sure. So I think when myself, Matt Petco, who's the our chairman, co-founder, and founding investor, Kevin McCaffrey, all came together. It was more even from the aspect of that we knew that we had a special set of skills in
Right.
terms of physical security and crisis response. We knew that we were able to bring in a lot of great talent around the company and particularly in the Asia region with global experience in the space. And we wanted to find a way just initially to, again, like I was sharing earlier, very simply of providing value with our own unique skills, knowledge, and abilities. We weren't originally thinking about the problem of mass market crisis response. But as we started getting into it, even on the physical side, we realized there was a product that, particularly that Lloyd's of London is famous for, called kidnap and ransom insurance by nickname, and more officially special risk or political violence insurance, and that our type of crisis consulting response service on the physical side was actually embedded in the insurance policy and productized in that way through a financial derivative, essentially.
Okay.
And as we went on with time, we realized, at least in Asia, where it's relatively safe and stable, there's not a lot of conflict regions, particularly that need that. We realized there's a much larger problem in the digital cyberspace that was relatively untouched by the U.S. and other global firms, right? And so that's where we gravitated towards. We always like to say, especially as military guys, that we moved to the sound of the guns. The guns were on the digital space, even though we weren't traditionally from there. We understood how the business model worked in physical crisis response and special risk insurance. A point in fact, there's actually a pretty well-known crisis consulting firm headquartered in the UK called SRM, and I have the good fortune to be friendly with their management as well. And they made a full pivot from physical crisis response into cyber as well, right? So we're not the only ones with that idea that dared to jump across, because we saw the parallels between the physical and cyber world from this specific niche of
Yeah.
emergency response, right? So yeah, this a bit of the beginning is honestly is a little bit more like a bunch of guys who thought we were really cool, want to come together and build something small in our space. And then as we got on, and it was a good business in the beginning. I mean, we were profitable, at certain junctions, et cetera, but we could see that it couldn't scale and eventually want to take on the next challenges to solve a bigger and bigger problem in the space. Right.
Right. Do you want to talk about your book, The Second Shot, A Green Beret's Last Mission? Talk to me about this
Sure
as
thing.
much as you want.
Sure thing. So I was signed by Amazon Publishing a couple of years ago to share an event that made some international headlines back in 2013, which
Okay.
very much led to the founding of Black Panda as well. Right. Ultimately, it kind of gave me the insight that I found a tremendous amount of meaning around crisis response in particular, as I was sharing about wanting to add value in my life's work with something that I believe that I can uniquely provide from a skills, knowledge, and ability standpoint. So yeah, back in 2013, I had a Taiwanese family friend, actually the younger sister of my mother's best friend, growing up in Taiwan, who was kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf terrorists in out of eastern Malaysia, Pom Pom Island. Yep.
Why?
Completely random, actually, Michael. Yeah, it wasn't. They just at the time, Abu Sayyaf targets foreigners in the vicinity for financing their terrorist operations. Right. In many ways, as we use the term terrorist, I mean, to be honest, they've become more like bandits in terms of just conducting these type of oftentimes transnational, high-profile kidnapping events, and
Hmm.
hoping that they catch on to a foreigner, a wealthy foreigner that they can be paid potentially millions for, right? And so it was actually completely random, but the unique aspect of the story was that because she went to the same school as the first lady of Taiwan, who incidentally was is my aunt, married to my uncle, who is was at the time the sitting president of Taiwan. The Taiwanese media picked up the story. It became a huge national syndicated story, right? So all of this played into raising a much higher risk profile for Evelyn. Evelyn Chang was the name of the family friend who was kidnapped and overvalued. Because the Abbasai have heard and saw the news story around this, and as it kept on getting
Oh
promoted bigger and
no.
bigger, the ransom went up higher and higher. It started actually at 5 million US dollars, which is not something the Chang family could have paid.
Right.
So so for me, I was actually in between jobs after I had left Palantir. I was looking for my next kind of stage of things and stage of life. I'd been the Green Beret for 8 years at that point. Spent a little bit of time at Credit Suisse and then at Palantir, and then I was moving on to the next thing, kind of floating along. And struggling with my own transition, to be honest, from
Sure.
the military to the real world, and found out about this and flew out to Taiwan when my mom was visiting, and ended up meeting the Chang family. So,
So
yeah.
can I ask you this? Like, you're kind of related to the people that are involved in this incident, yeah?
Yes.
And when it first happens, like, did you watch it on TV when it first happened? Did you notice this, or did your mom find out and all that kind of stuff, and then you found out? Because again, you spent a lot of time in the first 10 or 15 minutes of this call, right, talking about these unique skills, knowledge, and ability that not just you have, but that you and your friends have, essentially,
Mm,
right, and
yeah.
that you've been involved. I want to get these words right, in crisis response, kind of your whole life,
Mm,
and you did say this other thing of like, as Green Berets, right, or as serious military people, we just kind of gravitate to where we hear the guns going off,
mm,
right? Which is more of an analogy or a metaphor for just like we kind of get drawn into these things. Is there a sense of, I don't even know how to say, what's the right word for this? Luck is probably the wrong word, but like a fortunate that like you knew these people and you knew it happened and you have all these skills. So like they didn't have to go find somebody to do this.
right.
They could just go, Gene, what are we going to do?
Right.
Kind of thing.
That's Michael. That hits on the nail. On that nail gets hit pretty hard over the head with
Yeah.
me with this, because I think all the
Right.
time about how unlucky those Abbasiyaf were to kidnap this particular foreigner as well. That just happened to have a family friend like myself that
Right.
was completely available and psychologically available to spend all of my time on this. Right.
Exactly. It's because you were
And
between jobs as well. So you were
yeah.
looking for something to do. And let's be fair. Again, I don't know this, right? Because I never served.
Mm,
But so I can only presume. But there has to be like a desire. Like one of my buddies went to the United States Air Force Academy in high school,
mm,
right? And he was the guy who always wanted to be around the action,
right.
right?
Right.
And it's almost like exciting in a way. Maybe it's also scary a bit, but it's like, okay, I have something new and exciting to do. I feel like it's a feeling you might have had, no?
Yeah, absolutely. It was a time in my life that I was having a hard time reconciling what my identity was. What
Yeah.
was my task and purpose? I mean, it's a very classic challenge. For particularly this war on terror cat like cohort of veterans of finding a sense of place. In the world afterwards. And so I think that definitely contributed quite a bit in terms of seeing something that felt familiar as a calling, right, rather
Yeah.
than a job. And I was drawn to it, right? As soon as I refer to it as just the pull of a simple calling again, right? And just something so
Right.
clear, of a task and purpose. It's one of the reasons why I like crisis response, is because it helps always put in context my own problems, which always seem massive, as it does for everybody, right?
Right. Right.
And just puts it in context so quickly that my problems are so small compared to, in this case, Evelyn, who
Yeah.
he was kidnapped by
Right.
terrorists and dragged into the jungles, right? that made my problems at the time so much smaller, and gives me clarity and a sense of focus, to be honest. And why one of the reasons why I enjoy from an arm's length that emotional pull for these type of situations. Yeah.
So you're right. Bad luck for these Abu Sayyaf guys, right? Like they couldn't have picked a worse person with better friends to be able to do this. Can you just run me through as much as you can
Mm.
about like what you did? Because I presume if you're telling this story, that at the end of the day, Evelyn was okay.
Yes. So maybe just
But can you
got
walk
to
me through
share
how this
details.
happens? Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll save the details for those that care to spend a few minutes looking through the book when it comes
Yeah.
out in October. But the end result essentially was that it was one of the fastest recorded recoveries of a Abu Sayyaf kidnap victim, 35 days. We
I'm,
were,
la- I'm laughing because these guys must have been so mad at themselves. Do you know what I mean? Like, what were we doing? Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
yeah, and then part of it was that I was able to link up with through West Point connections. Uh, West Point graduates who were serving in the Philippine military as scout rangers, which is kind of like the elite infantry of
Yeah.
the Philippines military, as well as Nika operatives, which is like the CIA equivalent in the Philippines. And so, two groups of these folk basically emerged as heroes through all of this and volunteered basically to go in and conduct the exchange, masquerading as engineers working in the area. I mean, it was very, very dangerous for them to go all the way into the jungle camp. We were able to link up with Australian intelligence operatives, operating and collaborating with the Nika guys down south, and ended up inserting a tracker and logger device in the ransom exchange materials, which led to the Scout Rangers immediately with several follow-on massive assaults that ended up destroying nearly all pretty much of the 80-person Abu Sayyaf group, right? So it was basically a successful exchange as well as a follow-on of one of the most successful recorded military operations against this organization over the last 15 years or so, right, during that time.
Did you have just way better tools than they had as well? Like, I don't know how well equipped these guys are, how much money they have, but I guess they can't be so well funded if they're just out there kidnapping people for food. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that that's probably the biggest thing is that there was a big advantage in terms of education, of course, and just capabilities and tools, et cetera. There were incidences where I was using various cyber techniques and leveraging different network capabilities to pinpoint Evelyn's location.
Right.
Once I got into the Philippines, et cetera, there was a tremendous amount of human intelligence support from the new friends I had made, with the Scout Rangers, the Nika operatives that so generously and graciously lent their time and put their lives at risk as well as their careers, as detailed in the story to help me. Um, but yeah, certainly from a tools, but also just a pure capability standpoint. But also, again, I think the biggest thing was that we were able to maintain the element of surprise, which most would argue is the most important element during warfare, is maintaining the element of surprise. Uh, just having no idea who was behind Evelyn, right? And while we're operating and considering that, a Taiwanese lady would have access and friends that extended all the way into the Philippine special operations and intelligence apparatus, right?
But they must have known at some level, right? Because if they saw all the hullabaloo going on TV, and I'm going to get some of the relationships wrong because I didn't write it down when you were saying it. But if she's what is it, the sister of the president's wife in Taiwan?
No, so she was all she
Sorry.
did was go to the same high school, basically,
Ah,
many
okay,
years
okay.
afterwards. Yeah, yeah. So it
Ah,
was a very
okay.
loose connection. Honestly, in Taiwan, the media can be very paparazzi-like, and so,
Yeah,
like you were just saying, like why was she targeted? It was hard for Taiwanese people, which to understand how could this possibly be so random, right? Because
right.
it's so unusual, and so the media made a loose kind of 2 or 3 degrees of separation back to the president of Taiwan. My comment around it is that while there's no real direct connection from Evelyn to the president of Taiwan, Ma Ying-jeou, there was when I kind of naively wandered into this because I'm his nephew, right?
Right,
And, I,
right, right.
and
Sorry.
that's something I wasn't, and very, sheepishly, especially today. It sounds so obvious, but at the time, I was so used to not operating with any consideration with my family background, it wasn't until I started doing this I realized that I had actually put myself quite at risk if people had understood that who I actually was at that point,
Right.
interfacing with all these kidnapping affiliated groups. Yeah.
Was there, because we only see these stories in movies,
Mm.
really, and we don't know because we're not operatives ourselves. We don't know if how much of it is factual, how much of it is just made up to make a great movie. But
Mm.
I'm also super curious from the human side, right? What is the palpable fear like? Because it almost seems to me like you're always running the risk that even during a planned exchange, that like someone can get killed,
Yeah. Yeah. And I
right?
think that
Like
that,
there's
yeah,
not a 0% chance, right?
absolutely. And I think that that's what I try to bring out in the book is that ultimately, like if you could literally just sum up the story as simple as, hey, Evelyn Chen got kidnapped. Gene went in. There was a kidnap and ransom exchange. There were some follow-on operations. Done. But it doesn't really trace the
No.
true, trials and tribulations, the lack of information, the lack of clarity, the fact that I was operating as a foreign civilian in the Philippines and technically illegally, right? All these things, I wasn't sure what personal risk that I was at, both from a risk to mission, as we call it, and as well as risk to force, and then just my own personal safety and whether or not I'd be charged with a crime or all these sort of
Yeah.
things that I was running around doing. And so all that I try to bring out in the story and try to make it as factual as I can from my memory, and also speaking with a lot of the people that were involved, but then also sharing what we were thinking during that time to kind of communicate that, you know, I mean, at one point it's, I have no evidence of this today, or anything like that. But at the time, the Nika operatives and the Scout Rangers kept on saying that the Malaysian special operations guys were running around and looking to interdict us. And especially once we had Evelyn to take her off her hands, that was like one of our top concerns, but they never appeared. You know what I mean? So it's one of those things that's like, yeah,
Right.
maybe, but not 100% sure. But I wrote about it because it adds that element of considerations of everything that we were doing at the time.
Yeah, because you can't ignore it at
Right.
all. Like you have to plan for it as well. But this is another thing that I want to know. You know what to do, right? You've been in crisis response your whole life. You have a framework for how to behave. You have a framework for how to process all this information, and you're working with other people on your team that know how to do this.
Hmm.
But Evelyn's in the dark,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
she has no idea what to do, right? She doesn't know, like, do I run to these guys? Do I get on the ground? What happens if something goes wrong? Which way do I go? Like, you know what to do,
Yes.
but you couldn't communicate with her. Like, you're not sending her like WhatsApp text going at 4, please be ready for this. It's just not possible. How do
Yeah.
you plan for that?
So one of the biggest mistakes I made during the whole process, and there was a bit of a, I won't go to the details around the context, but there was a bit of desperation on my side at a certain point, and I jumped on the phone when they'd called, and basically just started speaking in Chinese to Evelyn for the first time for me to be at this side of the phone because I started feeling like she was starting to display Stockholm syndrome and
Right.
wasn't 100% aligned with our side. So I got on and I was just speaking to her in Chinese and telling her that, just tell them that I'm your Taiwanese physician. She had a major diabetes problem. We were trying to get her
Okay.
medicine. And in the background, I found out later they were holding a gun to her head and holding bolo knives to her throat and threatening her and like, tell them to speak English, tell them to speak English.
Oh my God.
I kept on saying like, I can't speak English. And, but emphasized to her, something I had learned quite deeply at SEER school, during prisoner of war resistance training is, they can take away everything in terms of like your comfort, your warmth, your food, et cetera, make you disoriented, but they can't take away your will to resist, right? And they can't take away your mind, right? That's the thing that you can always control in terms of resistance. And so I emphasized that to her what they taught us over and over, which is never forget who the enemy is. Never forget who the enemy is. And I said this to her repeatedly in Chinese. They grabbed the phone, said, "Hey, you're a Taiwanese spy. We're cutting her head off," and then hung up the phone. And I
Oh my
was
God.
in disarray for the next 3 days, thinking that I just killed her, basically,
Right.
taking too big of a risk. And she later on said that this was a big turning point in her own morale, where she realized it wasn't just her family, right, who was handling things; that there was a whole bunch of people, in the background that had professional experience, et cetera, that were trying to help her. And she started doing all sorts of things like stealing trash and taking notes and drawing like diagrams of the camp and stuff like that. that was passed on later on to the Scout Rangers, etc. She was actually quite amazing in terms of some of the things that she did.
Wow.
She naturally, almost accidentally did that was actually taught during resistance training. Like for
Right.
example, one of them is that you want to humanize yourself as much as possible to the captors and not be
Yep.
viewed as subhuman or just an object. So the Abasef routinely are known by matter of just SOP to to sexually to rape, gang raping is very very common. But
Mm.
Evelyn actually escaped it, during the during when she was kidnapped and she was sold from Abasef subgroup to subgroup, eventually landing in her jungle camp. One of the attackers reached through her shirt to molest her, like her
Hmm.
chest, and
Yep.
she just instinctively grabbed it and said, "I'm your grandma," right? Because she was a little bit older. She's like
Right.
close to 60 now. So I'm your grandma, and it kind of touched upon accidentally two things. One, it humanized her in the sense that, hey, I'm a person, right?
Yep.
Like, you know what I mean? Like, could be your grandma, but also touched upon filial piety, which is actually a really strong core value in the Philippines, right? Even though I always like to describe, as my investors and partners say, is like, Gina, understand the Philippines, you understand it's a Latin based culture, right? Number one. But some of the other Asian aspects, Confucianism and filial piety, is really strong in the Philippines. And so
Interesting.
I think that respect for elders ended up saving her from sexual abuse her entire captivity.
Can you talk a little bit about what's the right word here again? Like what kind of pushes somebody into Stockholm syndrome? Maybe what it is for people that may not be 100% aware of it, right? Because it's a very unique term,
Yeah.
and like what the risks are around it, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I think that Stockholm syndrome is where, particularly due to the stress and life endangerment, that the captives start to sympathize and even take the side of the captors, right? And so the famous case is, in Stockholm there was a bank robbery, and basically the captors started helping the bank robbers against the police, right? It
Right.
came that extreme, right? So in terms of where the danger is that we needed Evelyn 100% on our side. She doesn't feel these days, just to be fair to Evelyn, that she was demonstrating any signs like that. And when she tells the story, she absolutely was resisting and fighting and negotiating for her life. She's a really, really tough lady.
For
I didn't know
sure.
her. Yeah, I didn't know her as, in fact, I had never met her prior to this event, right? So, I didn't really know her that well. And so kind of assumed based off of, some of the dialogue that and naturally that it happens, right? It's very common, right? So the danger is that you need everyone, particularly the captive, to be aligned against the captors, right? It's like I was saying earlier, is never forget who the enemy is.
Right.
That clarity has to always has to be there.
I've learned so much already today. Can you talk to me about the feeling of success? No, I'm
Yeah.
very serious about this, right? Because it's kind of binary in these operations, right?
Hmm.
Success means that, like, I mean, at some level, it means that everybody that you want to be safe is safe.
Yeah.
That everybody gets to kind of go back to some sense, because you'll never the same person after this happens, right?
Yeah.
On any side of it,
Absolutely.
um, you just can't be, because the PTSD or whatever you need to call it in this situation is just always going to be there.
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
when you
I mean,
succeed, when the team succeeds, when you extract and you kind of win,
hmm.
do you know what I mean? Because there are multiple levels here, and this gets back to this idea you were talking about before, where like you were between jobs and you were kind of looking for, like, what am I doing with my life, kind of
Yeah.
thing. You have these 35 days, because I think I got that number right, of
Yeah.
just intensity, planning, training, acting, um, negotiating, all this stuff. It's all at a super high energy level.
Mm.
You're done. You get Evelyn, obviously, because it's a good ending to the story. But then how do you feel again? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. So I was just watching something on TV yesterday that reminded me of the code words even, right? It's like when you got the mission accomplished or captured the terrorist or rescued the hostage, it was you'd call over the call the code word jackpot. And it's such a good feeling when you could say jackpot through the radio. I mean, it's just
Yeah.
everybody hears it. Everybody kind of like does a little fist pump. You know what I mean? It's such a great feeling. And again, comes around to that aspect I was mentioning about the unique uh, sense of utility. Of value add right at the point in
Yeah.
time. For Evelyn, there's so many missions that I did in Iraq, as a special forces team leader, Green Beret, et cetera. But we helped so many people, but there was no relationship on afterwards, right? And
Right.
yes, there was a thank you, of course, at the time, maybe if you're lucky, and then now he was somebody that our family not only knew but loved, right, as
Right.
family friends, and nothing more meaningful, could have come around in many ways. Um, up to that point in my life, it's kind of interesting to reflect and say that and that's how I tried to write the book as well. It's just identifying the events that had action reaction throughout my life that led to this event, right? Whether everything, right?
Yeah.
Motivation, skills, like it's you can't just start this story in the middle of it and just say like this happened and you
No.
record it, right? It's
No.
so unusual. And really that's what I try to portray in my writing is how serendipitous all this is, right? Steve Jobs talked so famously in his 2005 commencement speech at Stanford about connecting the dots backwards, right?
Yeah.
And that really what this story for me was connecting those dots backwards. And after the event, that's where it took me a couple of years to come around to it with Matt, but I had it inside me. I was just like, I think this is what I was born to do.
Right. So, but so
Right.
this is going to be the next thing that I want to ask you about, if you don't mind, right? Because I
Yeah.
find this fascinating. You didn't just wake up one day and decide you were going to go to West Point. I
Right.
don't think so. Like I know my buddy who went to USAFA, right? He didn't just wake up one day and go, I'm not going to go to Harvard. I'm going to go into the Air Force. He's been thinking about this, and there are like little steps along the way when you're 9 years old, when you're 13, when you're 17, and your life just starts pointing in this direction. You're like, maybe this is what I'm just meant to do, kind of
Yeah.
thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think for me, like, and this is a bit more of the stuff that I try to talk about in the book and crystallize. I grew up in a very patriotic New England town, Concord, Massachusetts, where the
Yep.
Revolutionary War started, and even though it's a very liberal area, New England is actually incredibly patriotic, and I was
Yeah.
infused
Very.
with a lot of that, particularly in Concord. So there was that aspect. I literally, some days would say the Pledge of Allegiance on the way to school before saying, because I would cross by my neighbor's flagpole, right? So a lot of people are like, "It's so corny. Did you really do that?" I'm like, "Look, man, did I do that every single day? No, but I do remember doing it some days. It was very patriotic as a kid, but really, it's just that aspect of self identity and being pigeonholed in a lot of ways of being like a very typical Asian American kid,
Yep.
both by upbringing but also by American society, and feeling very frustrated by my status in life because I think that inherently inside particularly of how I've lived my life, is that I was a fighter, right? And
Yep.
being kind of typecasted like that in American society, I felt very frustrated by my station in life. And one day, I had actually to try to cut the story shorter, I shoplift. I was starting to shoplift like as a rebellious kid in high school, and I shoplifted a book by an Asian American author named Gus Lee, who wrote a semi-fictional story about going to West Point in the 1960s. And when I first read it, I thought it was a book like Hogwarts for warriors rather than wizards. I didn't think it was a real school. I'd never heard of it. So a little bit in a way, though, Michael, like it was for me almost like, oh my God, one day I just woke up. But when I saw it, I was like, this is where I need to go to find myself, right? And wanted a radical departure from both what my even not just society, but my own family and then myself were telling me who I was supposed to be when it didn't
Right.
feel congruent at all with what I knew I was at that time. I did not know clearly, but now I do, right? What I really
Yeah.
want.
And I don't want to make a complete equivalency to this, but I'm just going to say it out loud. Like I'm a UFC fan,
Mm,
and I don't fight, but I love watching fighting because I think it's the purest of sports. It's
mhm.
just two guys with the exact same equipment and just trying to see who's technically smarter, faster, stronger, better, whatever it is, right? And I watched the last Dustin Poirier fight
Mm,
against Islam Makhachev, and I don't even know if you care about any of this stuff. But the point is that he's a fighter. He
mm,
was born to be a fighter. This is for
yes,
Poirier because I just know him better. He
mm.
was just born to be a fighter, and he even said after his fight he lost. He's like, I don't know what else I can do. And
Yeah.
you
So
don't have to agree with this. You don't have to agree with this representation, but it's like
no,
that's the way he felt. You know what I
yeah,
mean?
I understand entirely. First, so I'm a black belt in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. I was a boxing champion at West Point.
Awesome.
I was professional MMA referee.
Okay, awesome.
About 10 fights. So yeah, very well acquainted. I I don't follow the UFC super closely these days, but definitely, of course, know who Dustin Poirier is and all that. So yeah, so I would agree. I mean, there's something innate in some people that they're simply warriors, right?
Yeah.
The UFC fighters are warriors, right? They express themselves and their warrior spirit and personality through competitive cage fighting, right?
Yep.
Soldiers, of course, express it in a wider profession, profession of arms and all of that. So I think that there's an aspect of that. There's a calling inside that I knew, like it was almost accidental. It was very accidental when I look back in terms of my, what inspired me and my motivations to go to West Point. And it took me years to find that at West Point too, because I was such a bad cadet. I was such a bad plebe. I got hazed a lot. I was, most of my classmates probably remember me as a total, just absolute moron, at school, just incapable. I was actually I actually had the lowest military rank at the end of plebe year in my entire class. I was so inept. So, look, it took me a lot of time to figure out my bearings and readjust myself,
Mm.
into everything. But it really was 9/11 that woke me up as well to look at my time in the U.S. Army as something less about self-interest, right? And rather than at that time, I was motivated enough and believed, where the American government was sending us was for all the right reasons. Dealing with 9/11, I was very, very motivated to fight at the time. And that's why I ended up going so far in the U.S. Army in that direction. Right. Uh, so yeah, but to your point in the question, I do think that there's an inner calling for many folk, whether it's that they want to be a hero or they want to be a warrior, all these things prove themselves. There's a lot of those aspects that come around in the military. And I think those same characters can be found in combat sports as well. Yeah.
I agree. Okay, look, this has been a fascinating conversation for me. I could keep you forever. I don't want to give up all the details because I do want to encourage people to buy the book, read the book. Did I get the title right? The Second Shot, A Green Beret's Last Mission, published by Amazon, you said, and available when? October?
October 1st. Yeah,
October
it'll
1st.
be published in the States, and all the marketing will be around there. And then, of course, on a selfish basis, as it's in many ways the origin story of Black Panda. I'm
Yep.
engaging with different folk out here in Asia to make sure that the company gets some of the attention as well. The story.
What an incredible story. I really appreciate you reaching out and sharing this with me, and also for just being so open and honest about answering the questions, not just about what you did, but about how it felt. Because at some level, those are the things that most people will never understand because they'll never experience it in a way
Right.
that you did. So
Absolutely.
thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Michael. It's always a pleasure.